I can't even run. This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome once again from Johannesburg here in South Africa. My name, of course, is Evan Jansen. The show is live. It's broadcast from our studios here in Auckland Park. We're also streaming live on YouTube right now, where the whole show is always available on demand on our YouTube channel. Now today, it's exactly 1 year to the day that Ebola was announced to the world. Where are we in the fight against this dreaded disease? South Africa is running out of burial space. Do we have solutions? We also look at conscious investments. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is problematic in South Africa. And the Proteas ahead of their Cricket World Cup semi-final against New Zealand. It really is the ultimate do or die. But first, the day's news with Domal.
Good morning, I'm Anine Domal. Let's just have a look at the stories making headlines today. The rape trial of former tennis star Bob Hewitt will start approaching a verdict today. This is closing arguments in Hewitt's rape and sexual assault trial are set to start in the High Court sitting in Palm Ridge. The former Grand Slam tennis champion is accused of raping 2 and sexually assaulting 1 of his former students. The High Court in Pretoria will today hear a claim against mining company Aurora Empowerment Systems directors. The directors are accused of allegedly stripping the assets of the liquidated Kamotsi gold mines. Aurora was appointed to take over the management of 2 of Kamotsi's gold mines in Gauteng and the Northwest after the company was liquidated. Aurora's liquidators want the court to hold the company's directors, which include Nelson Mandela's grandson, Zondwa Mandela, and President Jacob Zuma's nephew, Kulabuse Zuma, responsible for the fraudulent running of Aurora. Earlier this month, an urgent application by Kulabuse Zuma to have claims of over 1.5 billion rand against Aurora set aside was dismissed by the High Court. The Ebola epidemic that has claimed more than 10,200 lives is not yet over. A new report by Doctors Without Borders into the outbreak in West Africa has warned the epidemic isn't yet something of the past on the first anniversary of fighting the deadly virus. The report also claims the scale of the epidemic was downplayed at first by the World Health Organization and African governments. Protests over the statue of Cecil John Rhodes at the University of Cape Town have entered its 3rd week. UCT students who have been occupying the Bremner building since Friday have also vowed to continue their sit-in until their demands are met. A group of about 30 students, non-students and the university's SRC say they want a definite date when the statue of the British colonialist will be removed, as it represents institutional racism.
If you have to look at the setting in terms of UCT, the representation is in a negative light. And it's quite important to remove Cecil John Rhodes statue because a statue glorifies somebody, a statue pays homage to somebody. And as students, we feel that Cecil John Rhodes doesn't represent the values and the aspirations that we have in today's society.
Justice Minister Mike Mashuta has declined to give details of Eugene de Kock's whereabouts, saying he is alive and not in prison. De Kock, the former head of the apartheid-era Fakwa security police base, was granted parole in January. De Kock's lawyer raised the alarm earlier this month, saying his client was being held against his will. In response, Mashuta only said de Kock was no longer in prison.
Eugene de Kock is on parole. We have also announced that we will not be disclosing his whereabouts because of him having expressed the wish for us to keep details relating to his release and his whereabouts private.
The statesman who transformed Singapore into a wealthy global hub has died at the age of 91. Lee Kuan Yew, founding father and the city-state prime minister for 31 years, passed away in the early hours of this morning. After a week of mourning, the state funeral for Kuan Yew will be held on the 29th of March. Remember, you can find all of those stories on Facebook. Just search for Newsroom. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Janine. It's been exactly a year since Ebola was declared a public health emergency in Guinea. To date, more than 10,200 lives have been claimed in what has been the worst epidemic of Ebola the world has seen. Now, teams from Médecins Sans Frontières have and still are heavily involved in fighting the outbreak, which remains out of control in some areas. Today, MSF will release a gripping report looking at the pressures and the tough decisions the organisation has faced responding to the deadly virus. And to talk to us about some of the insights of this report, well, we are joined in Cape Town by MSF's medical coordinator, Dr. Gilles von Kutzum. A very good morning to you, Doctor. Thank you for joining us once again.
Good morning, Eben. Thank you for having me on the show.
It's hard to believe that a year has passed. It seems so quickly. But before we look back, Ebola is still claiming lives in countries like Liberia, Guinea and Sierra Leone. Where are we right now in the fight against this deadly virus, Doctor?
Well, we are still at 150 new cases in the week leading up to 15 March, mostly in Sierra Leone, hotspots and in Guinea. Although very sadly, there's been the announcement of one new case in Liberia during the weekend. This is still a level of transmission that is higher than any previous outbreak. So there's no reason for complacency, and we need to keep up the effort, even if there is a positive decline compared to what we had in the middle of last year. But it's still very high ongoing transmission.
Now, Doctor, a year on exactly today, you're about to release a report a little bit later this morning outlining where you are and what you'd like to see happen. What are the key points in the report that you'd like to make public?
I mean, the report is a reflection on, as you say, on last year, looking at a very sad anniversary, 25,000 cases, more than 10,000 deaths. This should not have happened. It's the result of very serious neglect by the international community, which only really started to respond in October, November. It's been very tough for MSF and for ministries of health in Liberia, Guinea, and Sierra Leone to carry almost the entire response on their shoulders during most of the outbreak. This should not have been like that, and we are definitely calling for, in the future, to create an international outbreak response capacity that can prevent this type of getting out of hand of the epidemic as we've seen today.
Doctor, you guys at MSF, you knew immediately on the ground that this outbreak was unprecedented, unlike any you've seen before. It was a claim that was rejected immediately by the World Health Organization, I must add. Just take us back to the beginning of it all. What were the early signs that showed you guys that this outbreak would be unlike any other?
I mean, all previous outbreaks were mostly confined to rural areas. Had less than 500 cases. Very rarely did they reach a capital. In March, when the outbreak was discovered, it was already present in 4 different prefectures in Guinea. It had already reached Conakry. So we were dealing with a very scattered outbreak, unseen before. It was clear that this was going to be an outbreak that was going to be very difficult to respond to. On top of that, it was on the cross lines between Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea in an area with highly mobile populations going through porous borders, making inter-country coordination essential. So this had all the signs of being a very difficult outbreak, needing a massive response from the beginning.
Doctor, in April of last year, April, May, somewhere around there last year, when you guys at MSF warned that this epidemic was threatening so many lives, you were called out to be alarmist by the World Health Organization. The response that followed, the international response, was quite sluggish, if to be kind to the international response. What would you say was the overall effect of this slow response initially?
I mean, the overall effect of the slow response very clearly let the epidemic go out of control. It was impossible to control it with the means on board. Only private aid organizations and very weak health systems in the region. The fact that the response came so late is the direct reason why we've had so many cases and why it has been so difficult to control. The example of Liberia today shows that with a vigorous, robust, flexible, rapid response, you can decrease the number of cases. And this is what we need to do now for Sierra Leone and for Guinea as well.
Well, Doctor, thank you for joining us today. You guys have done a fantastic job as Médecins Sans Frontières in curbing the collateral damage in these countries and stopping it from being spread around the rest of the continent. That's Dr. Jules von Kutsum, who is the medical coordinator of Médecins Sans Frontières here in South Africa. Let's have a quick look at your comments, at your tweets. What are we talking about on this Monday morning? I'm sure it's quite a busy news Monday morning. Now, Tsepo Msweshwa says, in fighting monsters, be careful that in the process you also don't become one. Hashtag Eugene de Kock, of course, that's one of our top stories today. You know, Eugene de Kock doesn't want the people to know where he is. I don't know. SA versus NZ 24 March talks about Eugene de Kock whereabouts got to do with his undying passion of biological warfare. Search the Vlakplaas Museum. Maybe he's doing a test of early breakfast or something, says Marayeza. Merentle Terekula says, does anyone know where Eugene de Kock at? Apparently, he just disappeared off the face of the earth. Because he wants to. He doesn't want to be seen at the moment. Harold Furwood says, don't recall any testimony during a TRC to refer to alien abductions. What other conclusion is left if the SAPS don't have Eugene de Kock? It's a simple thing. Eugene de Kock doesn't want to be seen. He wanted his release to be private. Now, let's move on to our tweet of the day. This one comes from Charlie Matthews. Now we're talking about racism. And, of course, inclusive city is the hashtag that's been causing quite a stir. If Cape Town isn't doing the hard work of addressing structural racism, land, economy, and integration, then hashtag inclusive city is just a PR stunt doomed to fail. They're talking directly to you there, Auntie Pat. I hope you're listening. Let's now take a look at the front pages from around the globe. In Israel, the Jerusalem Post leads with security forces who announced the arrest of a Hamas cell in Kalkelia that has plotted a series of terrorist attacks in Israel. We move to China. The South China Morning Post reports American giant 21st Century Fox will give Hong Kong's television industry a major boost in the arm with a massive investment in making programs in the city for the Asian and international market. Then in Australia, down under, the Australian, well, that country announced that it is on track to meet or beat its pledge to cut carbon emissions by 5% by 2020. It's one thing to cut carbon emission. It's another thing to export all your coal to the carbon-producing countries in the world. Maybe it should be a double-edged scenario. But let's have a look at what's happening here in South Africa, across our country. We start in the Cape Town High Court, where, well, sentencing proceedings continue for Thandi Makubela, who is found guilty of killing her husband, acting Judge Patrick Makubela. Still in the mother city, Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu will speak about TB at a gala screening of the film Breathe Umfefulu. That's ahead of World TB today. I can tell you that we'll have something special on the show regarding that. Then in Durban, our Premier, Senzo Mkunu, will lead a government delegation to Glenroy Farm on the south coast, where mass graves were uncovered. Should be interesting. Anyhow, time for us to take a short break. You're watching Newsroom here on SABC News.
to you live from our Auckland Park studios in Johannesburg, South Africa. Welcome to AM News on SABC News. We're on DSTV channel 404. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We'll be taking you through all the developing stories, all the leading stories in South Africa, in the continent of Africa and the rest of the world. The power utility has attributed the current wave of load shedding to what it has described as unforeseen technical problems at current power stations. Eskom has warned that there's a risk of a total blackout if consumers do not use electricity sparingly.
We must work together to make this world better for all. This is what Nelson Mandela told us. He taught us a very important lesson.
That's AM News, daily at 10 a.m. on SABC News.
Welcome back. Municipalities are fast running out of land and burial space to enable communities to bury their loved ones. This was revealed at a conference held in Durban South last week. According to South Africa's Local Government Association, old cemeteries in big cities are filling up very fast. Saga's Development Division has suggested and advised South Africans to resort to other methods of burials like cremation and the reopening of old graves to solve the issue of burial space. The practice might be in conflict with cultural practices of some communities. Now, Pepe Das, who is the manager of cemeteries, joins us from our Durban studio. Good morning to you, Pepe. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Evan. Good morning, viewers.
And then in our studio in Johannesburg City Park as well, we have a cemeteries expert, Alan Buff, to talk about the shortage that we are faced with and how we're going to deal with it. Firstly, good morning to you, Alan. Thank you for joining us as well.
Morning, Eben. Morning, viewers.
If I can start with you here in Johannesburg, Alan, just set the scene for us. How pressing is this problem of a shortage of space in us running out of land?
It's not present in Johannesburg. Fortunately, we realized this when we took over all the municipalities to make the city of Johannesburg back in 1996. And we did a ground truthing, and we looked at the burial space we had, the amount of people we had, the population density, and so forth. And we realized then that we'd have to start providing. And the same goes for all the other municipalities. So we looked at all this, and we've made provision. And we got sufficient land at this point in time for an additional 50 years in Johannesburg, notwithstanding all the different methodologies that we're actually introducing and have introduced.
Pepe, is that the same picture for you guys in Durban? I think it's a little bit more bleak down there, isn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately, Eben, it is. Our terrain is different, and it poses a lot of problems when we look for suitable land. You know, the geology of the land makes it very difficult. And we have conducted exercises to identify suitable pieces of land. The challenge is that when we do find a suitable piece of land, you've got to remember that cemeteries are quite extensive pieces of land. Very often, the challenge is that there is a demand for that same piece of land for development. So you're constantly in a battle to provide a service in terms of what's traditionally required and to cater for the requirements of the living. Our latest exercise yielded 3 possible pieces of land in the north. But when we investigated further, those pieces were already earmarked for development within the next 10 years, and they're prime pieces of land. So there's a serious challenge. And generally, when one looks at the eThekwini area, there's a huge potential for groundwater sources. So the environmental impacts have to be seriously considered when one establishes a cemetery, because you can't, negatively impact on these natural resources.
Yeah.
So it is quite a bleak picture, and it's not necessarily just Durban, but it could be other places also.
Yeah, it's kind of a nationwide problem at the moment. I want to talk to you about the kind of discussions and the kind of alternative solutions that you're having. You know, we're talking about reopening old graves, cremation and the like. Are you in a consultation process with traditional authorities?
Yes, we do. We've run a program of awareness for over 10 years now. And it's quite visible in the media when occasionally, you know, these issues hit the media. But we do have these programs, and look, it's a very difficult situation, as the only way to approach it is to basically continue this conversation in the hope that there's an understanding at some point in time that, you know, the alternatives that are available need to be used. I think to a certain extent we've been successful here in eThekwini in that the reuse of graves is quite an extensive practice. But this will also pose a challenge, because one just can't look at land as a finite resource. I mean, as an infinite resource. There's only a certain amount of land available. But against this, you have to consider the burgeoning population. Now, this country has seen an explosion of the population in the last 60 years, which has trebled. And it's quite scary to think that it's taken the existence of mankind to a certain point in our history 60 years ago, and then we start to treble ourselves. We're going to see, you know, even further and faster increases to the population. And that's going to impact on us even more than it's impacting on us now. So if we are challenged right now with regards to finding more space,
Absolutely.
It's going to be incredibly difficult in the future. So it's absolutely necessary for us at this point in time to consider alternatives. So if burial is a methodology that one wishes to use, then let's try and make it as sustainable as possible. And let's try to practice burials with as little impact on the environment as possible. And let's consider other environmentally friendly ways that release us from using the land the way we are using it to dispose of the dead. And if it means cremation as an option, then that's it. Or the other possible methods that we could possibly use that are environmentally friendly to release us from the space demand that we currently have.
If I can come to Alan here in Johannesburg, I want to talk about prioritizing methods that Pepper's talking about, prioritizing methods of burials. Are you guys in that within, how far down the line are you in that process here in Johannesburg?
Well, we've got the two main processes. One is the traditional burial, which is a single person in a grave. And secondly, of course, we have cremation, which is approximately 10% of the population. What we've been looking at over many, many years now is better ways of actually utilizing the facility. We don't want to destroy the facility. We want it to remain as heritage so that we know where our roots came from and for future generations. So we looked at this carefully and we said, well, can we bury a second person of the same family member in the same grave? And that had been approved about 40 odd years ago in Johannesburg. So we've been placing a second person within the same grave of the same family member. Now we come to a point that after decomposition, we can actually add another person into the grave. So we can actually have 3 people in the same grave from the same family. Therefore, it's saving vast amount of space.
Yeah.
Our next alternative, which we've actually introduced now, is what we call reduction burial. In that, the family, after about 20 years to 30 years, depend upon the decomposition that's taken place and the actual soil type, which actually influences this plus bacteria. You'll find that we're able then, with the family's permission, to exhume the remains, whatever's left in the grave, and to replace those remains back into the same grave. So you're not losing the culture, the heritage, or the dignity.
Yeah.
What we're doing then is enabling the family member to continue utilizing that particular grave for history. Now, that is what we've actually introduced in Johannesburg at this point in time.
Pepper, what do you say to that? And then give us the reaction of communities to the kind of solutions you guys are putting forward.
All right. What Alan is discussing is the same sort of practices that we encourage here. However, the aspect of retrieving remains, old remains, and reburying them in a reduced manner is something that still has to take off here. Our biggest practice in terms of dealing with burials in a sustainable way is the actual reuse of graves. In fact, to my knowledge, quite a few of our cemeteries have been practicing the reuse of graves in some form from the basic, the establishment of these cemeteries, which in some cases are very old. The original reuse methods were when families would reuse a grave and bury. However, those practices existed with certain sectors of the population. They were generally the white Christian population groups. However, that has now caught on with the wider population where people are quite accepting, I would think, to reuse graves. But the idea of reducing and retrieving reduced remains, reburying them, that also does release one from the land, but it still occupies space to a certain extent. And I suppose to a certain extent it makes it sustainable. One has to look at how long does one continue these practices. And if you look at these methods, which are already in practice in European countries, for example in Italy, with a very small land mass, for the Italians, they have a serious problem with the disposal of the dead, and they've been using mausolea and reduced methods, etc., for a long time.
Yeah.
But the challenge for space is still the challenge. Whether you go upwards or sideways, you're still occupying space with the remains of the dead. So there are ways to sort of mitigate, the challenge for space. It just delays, I think, to a certain extent, the critical point that one will eventually reach when we suddenly realize your landscape is being, flooded by infrastructure that's containing the dead.
Thank you very much, Pepe. Thanks for joining us today. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, gentlemen. It is concerning. There's also huge financial implications, I would think, within whatever solutions we come up. But thank you for joining us. That's Pepe Dasu, who's the manager of cemeteries down in Durban, and from Johannesburg City Parks, cemeteries expert, Alan Buff. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Now, let's have a quick look at your tweets. What are we at Twitter about this morning? At SABC Newsroom, of course. Gareth Pino says, while others are agitating for the removal of the Rhodes statue, in Kimberley, they just recently fenced it off to keep it safe, That's very interesting. Sizong Kimlamla says, I wonder how the Rhodes family feel. Rhodes must fall, Rhodes so white, Rhodes let's talk, Rhodes statue. Yes, we haven't heard anything from the Rhodes family. I understand that, that must be in England. Goblin says, would a Mugabe scholarship be as prestigious as the Rhodes? Both villains and racists, says the Goblin. Very interesting take there. Millicent Ndlovu says, black people are racist. After we pushed for reconciliation, I disagree, sir. We are forgivers. You can't doubt that. Hashtag Rhodes. Yes, it is a very emotive issue, mired in race and race politics. But let's talk about money and being conscious with your money. Your investments don't have to only benefit you. It can also benefit the wide world around you. Now, the Worldwide Fund for Nature here in South Africa and Investment Solutions have joined forces to enhance sustainable investing in South Africa. The theme of this new collaboration aims, for both people and nature to exist in productive harmony through well-managed business and improving the environment while still delivering returns over time. Now, joining us in studio today is the Chief Investment Officer at Investment Solutions, Glenn Silverman. Good morning, Glenn. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
Investments and the environment, they're not always seen as compatible, is it? Why this decision?
So we've been focused on this area for some period of time. It's a very difficult area, complex, not simple. But, our investors tend to look at returns. They want to know that they got the best returns from the stock markets. I think increasingly over time there's a recognition, though, that you have to take into account a longer-term perspective, firstly, and also think about risk as well. It's not just about returns. And I think this focus on sustainability, talking about things that endure, things that have a longer time frame, trying to talk about how, as you said, humans and the environment can work in productive harmony is something that we feel very passionately about.
The collaboration with the Worldwide Fund for Nature, how do you see this collaborate going forward now?
So it's interesting. We haven't known them for that long period of time. Obviously, we all know the panda, and it's a very, it's a great brand out there. But spending time with the team there, we have a sense that we can do something with that, and that we are not experts in these particular areas. We are experts in the investment-related areas. They bring the more scientific aspects, especially relating to the environment. So we're actually a multi-manager company. We don't buy and sell shares, for example, directly. We pick asset managers, Investec, Allen Gray, Coronation, Prudential, and they go and do it for us. We want to ask better questions of those managers to make sure that they are doing what we expect them to do, to make sure that when they speak with their underlying corporates or the listed companies, that they're asking better questions.
What kind of questions would then that be that you'd be asking of these, and the sort of transition from socially responsible investment to sustainable investing? What's that picture?
Yeah, the terminology can be confusing. Many talk about the E, the S, and the G, the environmental aspects, the societal aspects, and governance aspects. In terms of governance, our managers are superb. I think they vote their proxies, they take on corporates when they need to do so, etc. It's beyond the E and S aspects that I think it's been somewhat weaker, and this is an area that I think with the WWF we can engage with managers and start asking some tougher questions. And there are obvious tougher questions to be asked.
Now, here in South Africa, the big buzz around the economy and then within this field of nature and how business will impact it is fracking. How do you guys view fracking and the impact it could have on nature, but then also the impact it could have on the South African economy, an economy that has the widest gap between rich and poor in the world?
Correct. So I think it's a fantastic example, because that's exactly why we decided to partner with the WWF. I have no expertise. I cannot tell you what I think about fracking. I read a lot, and I have a very layman's view, and that's why I think partnering with people, and they have hundreds of scientists and obviously connections around the globe, and in fact they've recently put out a very detailed paper on fracking. So trying to work with someone like that, I think, leads to a more sensible debate. And I think in all of these, we don't take very extreme positions. It's not about thou shalt or thou shalt not. Those are very dangerous words. But how do you grow an economy at the same time, take into account concerns about the environment, for example. So I think it's a balancing act.
Do you think emotions within this sort of space always brings a very dangerous element into play?
Well, I think you talk about this space, and we're watching all the earlier discussions and the tweets coming in about roads, etc. All of these things are very, very emotive, and people are very, very polarized. The answer is absolutely yes. Now, our asset managers, people who run the money, investment managers, tend to be very smart, and they look at the facts of the matter, etc. But some of these things do need to take other issues into account, and they've largely avoided these, because when it's hard, like societal aspects, environmental stuff, so difficult, we push it aside. We don't think you can do that anymore. I think the time has come, even from an investment perspective, to try and have some tougher discussions.
The way forward, and what would you like to see happen at Investment Solutions in the short and medium term within this space?
I mean, we run well over 300 billion rand of money that belongs to other people. So we have a responsibility, a fiduciary responsibility, and we think we need to use that money intelligently to start engaging with these asset managers, our investment managers, and through them to the corporates to make positive change. So to the extent we can start getting the investment environment and the corporate environment to start thinking more about these matters, and hopefully not just think, but act on them, I think we've made positive change.
Well, it's very new world kind of thinking, and very much needed in the field of investment. Often people think that, we always put profit before the environment, and that shouldn't be the case. Thank you very much for joining us.
Devin, thank you.
Well, that's Glenn Silverman, who's the Chief Investment Officer at Investment Solution. We're talking about sustainable investment. Maybe it's something that we should all think about when we play with our money. But let's take a look at our picture of the day now. The picture of the day, well, it comes from Lesejo Maponyane. It's talk as well. It was taken this morning, actually, and this is a pic of a taxi crash involving about 4 cars, and that's under Mzimhlope Bridge here in Johannesburg. There you see a taxi very much on the side, taken from, well, over the dashboard. We should invest in dashboard cams actually here in South Africa because we have so many incidents happening on our roads. But let's take a look now at what's happening on our Facebook page. The Human Rights Commission says it's concerned that communities in some rural parts of Limpopo are still living without basic services such as water and sanitation. Then, Tunisian authorities have arrested more than 20 suspected militants in a nationwide security crackdown that since gunmen killed 23 people, mostly foreign tourists, in Wednesday's attack there in the capital. And then more on Lee Kuan Yew, who is Singapore's first Prime Minister. Well, he died earlier today at the age of 91, triggering a flood of tributes to the man who oversaw the tiny city-state's rapid rise from British colonial backwater to a global trade and financial centre. All of those stories and a whole lot more on our Facebook page. Also, our website, sabc.co.za/news. That's where you get all the updates. Time for us to take a break. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News.
Nelson Mandela. That was, for me, having an opportunity to make a film about something he said. He's one of my heroes, and he makes me proud to be African.
Mandela spent 27 years in Robben Island and in other jails as a result of his struggle to end apartheid in South Africa before becoming the country's first black president in 1994.
So you make movies, like Spielberg?
Yeah, I make movies like Spielberg.
Join Musam Khalifi on Afro Showbiz every Saturday at 19:30 CAT. Zoom into Africa. This is Comoros. The president is Mr. Ikilulu Dwanine. Comoros got independent from France on 6 July in 1975. The population is over 700,000 people. One of the major languages spoken is French. Monetary unit is the Comoran franc.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. Let's just have a look at the stories making headlines today. The rape trial of former tennis star Bob Hewitt will start approaching a verdict today. This is closing arguments in Hewitt's rape and sexual assault trial are set to start in the High Court sitting in Palm Ridge. The former Grand Slam tennis champion is accused of raping 2 and of sexually assaulting 1 of his former students. The Ebola epidemic that has claimed more than 10,200 lives is not yet over. A new report by Doctors Without Borders into the outbreak in West Africa has warned the epidemic isn't yet something of the past on the first anniversary of fighting the deadly virus. The report also claims the scale of the epidemic was downplayed at first by the World Health Organization and African governments. The statesman who transformed Singapore into a wealthy global hub has died at the age of 91. Lee Kuan Yew, founding father and the city-state prime minister for 31 years, passed away in the early hours of this morning. After a week of mourning, a state funeral for Kuan Yew will be held on the 29th of March. Remember, you can find all of these stories on Facebook. Just search for Newsroom. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, back to you.
Thank you, Anine. Now, it's normal for children to daydream during class, occasionally forget their homework, and get fidgety at the dinner table. But sometimes these children are seen as naughty and undisciplined, when in fact they could have attention deficient hyperactivity disorder. Due to the media's vast portrayal of ADHD, it's easy to be misguided by unqualified opinions, myths, even half-truths, instead of knowing the facts. Now, joining us today in Pretoria is General Practitioner Dr. Shirley Ann Jordan. who focuses on assisting families with ADHD challenges. Good morning to you, Dr. Yadon. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Eben. Thanks for having me here this morning.
You know, in a recent article published online, I can't really say who it was.
Sure.
It says it was on medicating children with ADHD. It stated that South Africa has one of the highest rates of prescribing medication for children with ADHD in the world, with South Africa's figures exceeding that of the United States. What do you make of that sort of thing?
Yeah, but unfortunately, we don't have official statistics here in South Africa, and little is known about ADHD on the African continent. But there was research done by Prof. Anneke Meyer, and she did a study cross-cultural over several language groups. All the questionnaires were translated into most of the 11 official languages, which showed that the prevalence seems to appear similar to that of Western countries and international standards, somewhere between 5 and 10% of all school-going children. But we don't have official statistics, and prescribing data is not officially published either.
You know, the media, they're quick to point a finger at the doctors and saying, yes, doctors are very quick to prescribe medication for ADHD, when children are, in fact, maybe a little bit talented. I mean, in my case, I probably would have gotten ADHD medication back in the day.
True, Eben, and look how you've used your talent to be on Newsroom. That's probably why you do the short reports and not the long reports, Eben.
Yeah.
Quick, to the point, and the bottom line. These children are not untalented. They often are just misunderstood. I'm more concerned about that which is being underdiagnosed. And yes, there are studies that show underdiagnosis as well as overdiagnosis and misdiagnosis. But I'm very concerned about the children that are called lazy or stupid or unmotivated or defiant, just because they're not able to channel their attention or sustain their attention and comply. It affects them not only academically but also behaviorally and socially. And I'm more concerned about the damage that's being done by not recognizing this very real and dangerous, potentially dangerous condition.
You talk about undiagnosed, and I suppose there are quite a few conditions that could be undiagnosed. Even something like dyslexia, you know, where children are called stupid and the like. As a parent, how do you go about finding out what your child, if your child has an issue?
Right. Yes, there's several conditions that may masquerade as ADHD. Not everybody who struggles to sustain their concentration or who fidgets has ADHD. There may be several reasons for it, including medical, neurological, learning disorders, as you mentioned, dyslexia, that may look like ADHD. And it's important to have a very thorough assessment by a group of well-qualified therapists and doctors and the like.
Now, Dr. Yadon, how do you distinguish between a naughty child, a common naughty child, and somebody who actually needs medication?
Right, the criteria are quite specific. You need at least 6 of the criteria in the inattentive category, or in combination with the hyperactive impulsivity criteria. It's well stipulated in the DSM-5 criteria, and of course it's based not just on tick lists, otherwise we could diagnose over the internet, but based on a clinical interview. And the assessment needs to be done with a parent interview, because the parents know their child the best, as well as questionnaires from the teacher. There has to be symptoms of this condition in more than one setting. If it's only appearing in the classroom, there might be other reasons. There needs to be some of the criteria for longer than 6 months in a persistent form, which are not appropriate for their developmental age or development.
And how do you deal with a scenario like I've had in my family recently, where the teachers are pushing for a child to go on ADHD medication?
It is not for the teachers to make a diagnosis, but our teachers are the ones who spend a lot of time with our children in a very challenging setting, often with a large classroom with lots of stimulus that they need to deal with. So it's important to take cognizance of what the teachers are picking up. They can at most say these are red flags as to that there might be problems with your child reaching their potential, either academically or behaviorally or socially, and to then refer appropriately. But it is not for the teacher to insist on medication at all. That is something that the parents need to decide with, along with the treatment team, to have a well-informed decision-making team and a thorough assessment before we go that route.
Well, Dr. Shirley Ann Udan, I thank you very much for joining us today. A very insightful interview around ADHD medication. It should be in more than one place, not only in the classroom. Your child could just have been, like I was in school, a little bit naughty. Let's take a look at your tweets. Just remember, it's at SABC Newsroom. Protea Fire! That's where we are. It's do or die tomorrow. Protea Fire, all the best to our representatives down under in New Zealand. Make the country proud, Oaks, says Luazi. Sure, Oak. Love your work, Oak. Dion Govender says, Tuesday is going to be a great day for South Africa. Behind the Proteas in the Cricket World Cup 15 because we have the Protea Fire. I'm a little bit nervous if I have to be honest. Siegfried Gerber says, Proteas will face a mighty, well-balanced New Zealand team on Tuesday with a long batting lineup and informed bowling attack. Great game ahead. Thank you, Siegfried, making us very nervous, my friend. Hermanus Marit says, Protea Fire, good luck for tomorrow. Apply the same pressure on New Zealand as Sri Lanka, and I'm sure we will win. Okay. Now, we close today by looking ahead to the biggest Cricket World Cup match in South Africa's history. That kicks off in Auckland in the wee hours of tomorrow. The Proteas face an informed New Zealand at their home ground in the ultimate do-or-die encounter. Now, I'm joined by sports psychologist Julian De La Hunt this morning. Julian, good morning.
How are you doing, Eben?
I know you're very nervous, man, as much as I am. The ultimate do-or-die match. How tough is that mentally, considering the pressure we've put this team under in the last couple of months?
Yeah, well, I think, Eben, we've spoken a couple of times on your show, and I think specifically the South African public have put immense pressure on this cricket team. We've got a history of failures in World Cups. This is the 7th one. We're going to be biting our nails in the same way we have for the last 6 World Cups. It does play a major role psychologically, mentally on these players. They've got a guy by the name of Mike Horn who spent a bit of time with them recently, and I think that specifically, just to get over that fear of the uncertainty and that anxiety has been a major plus for them.
They seem to like Mike Horn. I saw today he said they have to hunt like a pack of wolves tomorrow. What do you focus on as an elite sportsman ahead of a game like this?
Well, I think first and foremost you need to ensure that you do the basics right. And then secondly, it's about really focusing on every moment, every one of the big moments, hunting like a pack of wolves. Everyone's got different methodologies. The important part is that you don't try and stray too far away from the norm of what you've done in the past.
Now, Julian, it will be a hostile environment tomorrow. Eden Park will be packed to capacity. They'll be right on top. Unlike a cricket field where they might be a little bit away from it, they'll be right on top of the Proteas tomorrow. How do you negate the effect of that kind of crowd as a player?
Well, again, I mean, this is where the big players will need to stand up. The ABs, the Fafs, the Hashims, and specifically Dale Steyn will need to pull the youngsters together. The crowd's going to be there. These are professional sportsmen. We've spoken about this in the past. They've played under high-pressure situations on a number of occasions. It's, again, do the basics right. Play the big moments, the critical big moments in the game exceptionally well and focus on them, yeah?
Play the big moments well. It's a lot easier said than done. Now, if we lose tomorrow, Julian, we're going to call them chokers again. What's your advice to the South African fan out there who's going to watch these games now? And if we lose, what would want to call them chokers?
Well, I think first and foremost, there have been 2 massive moments in this World Cup for South Africa. The one was this West Indian game where we came out under massive amounts of pressure, being expected to potentially choke again after the Indian loss. And secondly, the big Sri Lankan quarter-final win. What AB and this Proteas team have effectively done is they've they've rewired the South African public and all South African cricket teams into the future.
Julian, who is the guy that's going to win it for us tomorrow?
Well, again, I don't think there's one specific person, because I think that would be a heck of a lot of pressure on one individual. AB again has to come to the fore, but again, it needs to be a fantastic team effort. There's been talk all of a sudden of injuries in the New Zealand camp, so a lot of mind games will be played over the next 24 hours, but I think it's going to be one heck of an exciting game, and hopefully this is the Proteas team that takes us to the final.
Thanks very much, Julian. Thanks for coming in. I hope the fact that we've had 5-6 days off and them only 2 days off will be a difference. You think that could be a difference?
Well, it could be freshness of mind. I mean, before the Sri Lankan game, we saw how fresh the boys looked when they walked out there onto the pitch after 4 or 5 days out, and specifically 1 day of fishing and a bit of football on the fields. So yeah, I think it's exciting times ahead, and I think we'll be mentally fresh and ready for this game. We've broken the chokers tag, which is important. As I said, we've rewired the South African cricket public as well as the Proteas themselves for all future Proteas generations.
Wonderful, much needed. Julian, I hope you're right. I hope we have a fantastic game tomorrow, because I think the country needs it. We need a World Cup win. It will galvanize the society, social cohesion. We need a World Cup, Julian. We are losing our way. We're fighting with each other. We need to win a World Cup again. Thanks for joining us. Julian Delahunt is always giving us fantastic insights into elite sports and elite sports people. Now, that's where we're at. The Newsroom is broadcast live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. The show repeats at 2 in the afternoon with a rebroadcast then at 5 a.m. the following morning. We're also live on YouTube at that time, where the whole show is always available on demand on our YouTube channel. This is SABC News. You've been watching Newsroom. We love it in the morning.